Hello, good evening, everyone. My name is David Blauvelt. I am the coordinator of education here for the North Andover Historical Society. I'd like to thank you all for coming this evening to this great presentation, Exuberant and Exotic. But first, before we begin, a few house reminders. Please silence your cell phones with respect to the people around you and also our presenters tonight. In case of an emergency, we have two exits. We have the one you came in, and we have this one, which will take you directly back to our back parking lot. In case of emergency, that door isn't alarmed, but you do really have to get your hip into it to open it. Note that if I'm not the first one out the door. Bathrooms. Bathrooms are, as you came into this door, on your right-hand side in the alcove. This program, along with all of our other great programs, will be available on both North Andover CAM's YouTube channel and shortly thereafter our website in the video archive section. So if you miss anything, if you miss taking notes, don't worry about it. You can watch it again later. The Trustees of Reservations is a private land conservation and historic preservation organization. It was founded in 1891, and it's the world's oldest land trust and one of Massachusetts' largest nonprofit organizations. The Trustees protects and stewards 125 properties across the Commonwealth, including more than a dozen historic houses and over 50,000 objects, and that also includes Weir Hill, behind us and over here. Our two speakers tonight are part of that organization, the Trustees. Christie Jackson is the senior curator and curator for the Metro West region of the Trustees. She's received her undergraduate degree from Dartmouth College, holds 2 master's degrees, first from the Harvard Graduate School of Education and Museum Education, and the second from the Winterthur program in American Material Culture. She has worked at various museums, including the Mystic Seaport Museum, the Old Colony History Museum, and Old Sturbridge Village, one of my favorites, as senior curator of decorative arts. Thank you. A lecturer and author, Christie co-wrote a book with Brock Jobe and Clark Pierce about the 19th century cabinet maker Nathan Lombard entitled Crafting Excellence, the Furniture of Nathan Lombard and His Circle. Her current exhibition, just opened and capable for you to go see, features the Shaker community culture at the Fruitlands Museum. Go check them out. Susan Hill Dolan has worked for the Trustees for Reservations for 28 years, serving as curator for their North Shore portfolio of 6 historic house museums and cultural landscapes, which includes Castle Hill on the Crane Estate and Appleton Farms in Ipswich, Long Hill in Beverly, and the Stevens-Coolidge House here in North Andover. A graduate of the University of Massachusetts Amherst and Christie's Fine and Decorative Arts graduate program with the Royal Society of Art in London, she specialized in English and continental decorative arts and won an award for her thesis on Bristol Delftware. At Castle Hill, an early 20th century country estate and National Historic Landmark, her labor of love has been the extensive interior restoration of the Stuart-style Crane Mansion designed by Chicago architect David Adler. Susan lectures frequently and has authored numerous essays on decorative arts, historic interiors, and architecture for books and magazines. Her current research interests include the works of Frances Elkins, an interior decorator and the sister of architect David Adler. Tonight, Susan and Christie hope to research more about Joseph Romidis, the artist associated with tonight's topic, the scenic wall murals of the Stevens-Coolidge House. And so without further ado or introduction, Miss Christie Jackson.
Well, when Susan and I saw each other today, we had a good laugh as we looked at our outfits. And just like owners look like their pets, we realized that I was in exuberant colors for the mural I was talking about, and she is in monochrome today for hers. And I think it just, when we had that chuckle, it just reminded me how much fun we have, Susan and I working together. And I know there are some volunteers and lovers of Stevens-Coolidge Place in the audience, and just how much, I think, fun we have at this site together. So thank you for the involvement at Stevens-Coolidge. But we're really excited to share in the story of these murals at Stevens-Coolidge. I'll begin talking about the downstairs murals, and then we'll move upstairs into what we're doing currently. Just to give you a sense of all of the work that has happened between Susan and I together, we have about 30 years of working in the curatorial realm at Stevens-Coolidge Place. And really what we're doing now builds on what Susan and many volunteers over the years started with wallpaper work, paint work, a lot of restoration, and even cataloging all of the objects, the thousands and thousands of objects in the house. 5 years ago, I started really intensely working at Stevens-Coolidge when, thanks to an anonymous grant, we were able to really bring a sense of energy back to the house, and that included everything from wallpaper work, recreation, paint analysis, UV, and other sort of preventative measures to help care for those interiors, as well as card catalogs that hung on door knobs with shower curtains to bring those all the way up to the 21st century and beyond into an electronic database. So there's been a lot afoot. Before we really get into the interiors, sometimes it helps to take the exterior view of what's going on at the house. And the house has really undergone quite an evolution over the centuries. On the left-hand side, you'll see a representation of what it looked like when it was first built as a federal house. You're seeing a traditional center hallway, a lot of symmetry going on, a hip roof, the brick end walls. And then as the years go on, it becomes a little bit more Victorian. The roof line was changed. You can see the additions to the third floor. The chimney tops were rebuilt and a side porch was added. And then later on, and really the period that we're focusing on tonight is this colonial revival moment, and as it stands now in this picture. And when we talk about the last family, it's Helen and John who really transformed it later in its time. One of my favorite quotes was from John in 1923. He says, "The farmhouse fills us with greater joy every day, but every day we discover some small change that must be made, and all changes mean added cost." So this was really a labor of love for them over the years. So when we think about what's going on at Stevens-Coolidge Place, we are looking at a sliver of time, and I just want to acknowledge really the centuries of indigenous people that lived and called this land their own. And we're really looking at a sliver of time when it was called Ashdale Farm, and it went back 8 generations, from sort of the late 18th century all the way to the early 20th century. And we're sort of even zeroing it a little bit more to the 2 sisters that had a large role in sort of that moment of the house that now it appears as it does. So the first is Gertrude here on the left in this photograph. And she's really remembered for initiating a lot of the formal gardens that we have today. In 1907, for example, she hired pioneering landscape architect Louisa Bancroft Stevens to design and install the perennial garden. In addition, her sister, Helen, ends up meeting and marrying John Gardner in 1909 in North Andover. And soon after, they decide to take over the property and the estate. And it's at that moment that they're going to decide to renovate the house and really make it into this gentleman's farm turned into a country estate. Their collection is really a very, very personal one. One of the quotes that I loved of John was that he said, "The new theory is that our place is so beautiful that we should never enjoy it alone." And really, they surrounded themselves with friends and family and objects. Helen, with her long love and connection to Andover, had so many wonderful New England pieces of furniture. I swoon when I go in there. John was also related to Isabella Stewart Gardner and had long worked for a short amount of time with Frederick Law Olmsted before he became a diplomat. So when you put them together, you end up seeing this great combination of New England furniture and artifacts. You see a lot of international influences from their time abroad. And then also this colonial revival moment. In a diary from 1926, John actually said that he had a closet full of bronzes, statues, clocks, and plates, and, quote, "I have no idea where they will go," which I can appreciate that as a collector myself. So we'll see all of these influences coming together. And really, as they look to bring this estate into that colonial revival, that wonderful getaway for them, they enlisted the help of Chandler. And Joseph Chandler was a well-known architect and preservationist, if you will, already. He had just completed the House of Seven Gables, and they took a day trip there to sort of see his work, immediately loved it, and said, quote, he had full of promise. And Chandler, in his own right, was quite established at this point. He had graduated from the MIT School of Architecture in 1889. He set off on a grand tour, but more of the United States. And he sort of had this rare knowledge of both Northern and Southern architecture, which distinguished himself from other colonial revival architects at the moment. He also wrote a best-selling book, I have a copy, called The Colonial House, while he was working at Stevens-Coolidge. And there's many architects, scholars who talk about Chandler, but one of the best of them, Timothy Orwig, said, quote, Chandler was at the forefront of a movement to preserve, restore, and recreate the architecture of early New England. So really, these three together were going to transform Stevens-Coolidge Place. So we can't talk about Stevens-Coolidge and the murals without talking about color. One of my favorite advice books from that period said, rooms like people have personality. And boy, did Stevens-Coolidge have personality. Chandler talked about the importance of beauty, of texture, and of color repeatedly in his books. And so when you look at it, and at first when we went in to do the most recent work, we had noticed how the color had become muted. So for example, in the bottom right, the lampshades were all white, but when we pulled back and peeled back some of the ribbon edging, you'll see that there was blue underneath. Even the woodwork at the top had kind of faded and dulled with time. And then looking at the creases of some of the textured, wonderful textiles in the room, you kind of had an appreciation for all of the color that Chandler brought to his different projects. He talked once about details of shingles, and to me, I mean, who looks at shingles? But when he talked about it, he said that he loves, quote, the inequalities of the surface of shingles caused by drops of water dripping from one to another, heating a beautiful, varying color. And he was regretful, he said, when the time arrived for reshingling. So just again, this idea of color is so prominent. And I don't have time to go into all of the rooms that we touched our hands on, Susan and I, over the years, but just to show you how this comes together. In the morning room, we had taken down the 1970s white wallpaper and found hints of what was there, which was this pale pink blush color. We put up the sample on the left. We invited staff to come in. And as one of the gardeners walked in, she goes, it's the peony in the garden. And in fact, you really can see it when we reproduce the fabric as well, that this is a garden inside. John said our thrill was the blooming of the first rose in our new garden. And another time he talked about the garden saying there's a mass of bloom everywhere. So again, you can appreciate how the inside and the outside flow together so well. And that same color goes outside in these wonderful garden rooms that we have established. And I have here a little circle around the back door. So if you go in that entrance, this is the back side of the house, you kind of explode into the murals we're about to see. And this was very intentional, that on both sides of the murals on the first floor is either the front door, so you're entering into this oasis, these murals with these wonderful botanicals and trees, or you're extending your time in the garden by walking in the back door itself. And as they decided to do the murals, and here's a little hint, I'm building up. One of the wonderful things that they did working with Chandler is that he brought in a man named Joseph Ramirez. He was a talented muralist. He was most likely from New Bedford. We don't know too much about him. But you'll see on these quotations sort of these early times with him that he sketches rapidly, covering the whole wall in the space, and they liked what they saw, so he went back to Boston and got his paint. And they also said it looks just like wallpaper, but exceedingly well done. And this was a style that we're going to see, and Susan's going to talk about these influences, but wallpapers that really bring these whole encompassing sort of florals and gardens together. And in fact, they said they were worried it would be too exuberant and exotic, but they wanted to test it out. So onward they went. But one of the wonderful things was that it's not just the murals, but it's this sort of backdrop that Chandler builds for the murals that extend two different floors. And it's really a grand gesture, as he called it. He was famous for putting these double staircases in. And you'll see a little circle, and this is where the original staircase would have come down, just at one single staircase. He, in fact, moved it and created two kind of coming up to the same point. He loved to salvage architecture and reuse it, and this was a way to really bring some energy to the center of this space. On a side note, he was very particular, and even if John and Helen sometimes said, we don't know about that, he would kind of push his way through. And this happened earlier when he thought, Chandler, that they should paint the whole house exterior white. They weren't so sure. So John went to his office to talk to him, and he said, I spent much time at Chandler's office waiting for him before lunch and talking with him about the painting after. The result was satisfactory, but one of his most amiable and intelligent traits is his character is that he will never say no to any suggestion, but if he does not like it, he will divert it in the conversation. And Helen said, as usual, Chandler was delightfully vague. And really, the heart of the house, as you come up this double staircase, is this little moment where I love that within 3 feet, you have this wonderful lantern from John's Peking apartment, with this wonderful clock of Brown, it was a Boston maker, and then the signature of the murals right there on the stairwell. So it's really this coming together of colonial revival, of Boston, of the international travel. And in fact, here's the view looking from the front door down. So you really get a sense that this is the grand entrance. And it deserves noting that it's not just Joseph who's doing the work as the painter here, but in fact, there are a number of other immigrants that we think are Italian and German and Spanish all working on the house. And unfortunately, so many times these producers are not necessarily known, but we need to acknowledge them. And really, our work began looking at these murals because if you think about it, there's historical dirt everywhere. You have different heating systems, you have coal, you have sometimes wax that has built up. And so the process of working with Lisa, our conservator, first had to be taking the soot off. And what I love about this is that you really see, it looks like a cloud, like a storm cloud, a thunder cloud is rolling back. And you can see the arrows, the before and after of this blue as it kind of comes up. And so it really is like lifting a veil, if you will. In addition, one of the things that Lisa did as a conservator is that this paint can lift up over time. It's a distemper paint. It's a little temperamental. There's a rabbit hide glue that's put into it to kind of make it painted originally, and it starts to lift off. So one of the things that we do is consolidate and really stabilize what's going on. And using little squares of Japanese tissue paper and then brushing through it with this rabbit hide glue, you can push back and flatten all of the pieces that are coming up. And then in this case, Lisa was really amazed that it took 30 colors to make this mural. She said that is much more than a normal mural would be. And you can see here these wonderful palettes that she had mixing. And I just want to give a shout out to Lisa, who is a wonderful conservator. And conservators are not only scientists because they have to get that technology right, but they're also true artists to make sure that it looks like it's sort of all original and to the point. And here you'll see a little bit of a detail of the before and after, and really that shining brightness of the murals. Joseph Chandler said that color is too often overlooked in a modern house. And so this is really his response to that. It's texture, it's beauty, it's color. And if we just look at a little bit of the details, this is one of my favorite spots in the mural on the right-hand side. And I love that. I think when you get really close, it looks like that frond was added later. It's almost like see-through. You can see it sort of has a translucency. And I love that that was probably added at the end because you just want to kind of push it aside and walk in. And it reminds me in the gardens of that same pushing back the gate to find the sense of discovery in the murals. And indeed, there are little bits and pieces. There's whimsy in this too. So when you look in the murals, there's urns, not unlike what was historically there when Helen and John lived. We have our wonderful geese that aren't outside anymore, but they're kind of playful in the garden, lots of little garden doodads, and then also some birds as well. So there's a lot of whimsy, and I think when you look at it, you're both impressed on the whole level and then getting closer as well. And I'm about to turn it over to Susan so she can tell you sort of about the second round of murals. But one of the questions that we have certainly pondered is, wow, they went full-on color downstairs. So when you look at some of these, they're talking about the profusion of detail, of color, of life, that they think that this is a good thing and will be a great joy, but we have to live with it first to make sure. And so we're not sure exactly why they decide to go monochromatic upstairs. But as Susan will say, there's a lot going on with that sort of style being very popular of monochromatic murals, but also that they wanted to be in tones of brown. And so this is a great moment to kind of pass it over to Susan and see the upstairs murals as they start their transformation.
The mic on? Okay. Not sure. Figure that out and change glasses. But before I start, and thank you, Christie. It's wonderful. But there's going to be a lot of overlap that we didn't totally count on, but it's there. I did want to just acknowledge a woman who had a lot to do with Stevens-Coolidge over the years by the name of Marty Larson. I know she was very important to this historical society, and she had been the curator, part-time curator before I started in 1996. I knew Stevens-Coolidge meant a lot to her, so I was very sad to hear of her passing and just wanted to acknowledge that here while we're at the North Andover Historical. And now, part 2. Here we go. So just getting back to that notion of color and style influences, the American style was very an eclectic style. So we had this real wonderful mix of federal furniture, English, European, their travels, as Christie mentioned. So we might have this beautiful yellow damask, and originally there was a Chinese yellow carpet on the floor, imperial carpet, these beautiful greens, this real mix of things, very personal art in the room from their real Francophiles after having lived in France during World War I. And we see artwork that reflects those travels. And it's a beautiful and eclectic combination of things. And yet this sense of color as well, the light green that Christie found in the living room, but also the beautiful purple evoking the gardens, yet again, with their collections. So we had the purple Worcester porcelain there with the botanical prints, and then Joseph Everett Chandler added those manganese purple Delftware tiles to the Colonial Revival fireplace era. So it's this lovely, again, the lovely mix, and yet they were very much, the Coolidges were tapped into the tastemakers of the time, such as Edith Wharton, who was a friend. They had met in Paris. The expat painter Walter Gay, who was famous for his French interiors, and his wife Matilda. Even the French garden at Castle Hill, like Stevens-Coolidge. I've been to Castle Hill a lot. And that's evoking both colonial, but also those French tastes together. And again, they were in good company here because David Adler, the architect of Castle Hill, who designed the interiors with his sister Frances Elkins, was bringing the outside in, that color palette of the blues, the greens, the sands that you see as you look out the window in this English country house mansion in New England. So it's very much English sensibilities, but yet with American creature comforts like the club chairs and the crane bathrooms and this combination of old and new, which we see again at Stevens-Coolidge. There we go. And then we mentioned their love of France. This is actually a French wallpaper, the Palais Royal pattern that dates to circa 1800, 1810. That really brought the rooms to life with their lush landscapes and their dramatic architecture. This is an early print, but in the 1920s, 1924, the paper was reproduced and expanded the number of scenes by Paris firm of Worden and Chassé. David Adler took this and take that cobalt blue of Cornelius Crane's suite that we saw in the last slide to continue that color palette up to the third floor. where there's the ship room, as we call it. But it also expands, that narrow hallway is really expanded with that beautiful wallpaper and this gorgeous dramatic scenes of architecture, sort of people enjoying the gardens as well, but bringing that sense of space and depth into that hallway. In fact, his sister, Frances Elkins, used it in her entire third floor for home, the Casa Amesti in California. Also, I'm just going to introduce the concept of this monochromatic, where we see the monochromatic color scheme emphasizing the primary architectural details, known as en grisaille. Some have said grisaille, but we say generally in French en grisaille, which is a monochromatic palette in tones of grays and browns. And we see that very often in the European decorative arts. Here we see it in not only the decorative arts, like paneling on the French, on the right there, but a Van Dyck portrait. So again, we see these en grisailles, this mix of browns, grays, very popular style here, as seen in the wallpaper at Castle Hill, and again in the murals at Stevens-Coolidge. So here we see that same wallpaper really brings that European style, as well as the European style in the little vignette there from the Stevens-Coolidge. Again, that architectural, the vase, the urn on the pedestal, we see both in paint and in paper, and very much in the European style. So here we are, the Stevens-Coolidge, the second floor, the ballroom mural. Very unlike the colorful garden murals, sort of the lush European landscapes that we see in the first floor murals. Here we see the input from Chandler and the Coolidges to portray a monochromatic sepia tone series of landscapes. On the left, we see two very full photographs showing the full room with the barrel vaulted ceiling, which was restored again last summer, the sprung floor, and it's the chamber above that dining room kitchen area below. This was part of a building that was added to the main house, a building that dates to circa 1800, 1830. We think about 1828. Whether or not it was a tavern legend or not, we're not sure, but it is this separate building that was attached to the main part. And as you can see on the slide on the right, is a little peek into the servants' hall, which was added later. And this beautiful en grisaille or monochromatic sort of color scheme is reminiscent of other works of art that we see, decorative arts, print here that is an English architectural scene, often depicting that dramatic sense of landscape, but in this lovely sort of soft monochromatic tones. And that takes us back really to the European tradition of the picturesque. On the left is a portrait or a painting by Claude Lorraine, really the great master of the ideal landscape. And his seaport from 1644 shows an imaginary landscape full of warm colors, but also with the architecture based on 16th century Roman buildings. And on the right, that tradition of the picturesque continued into the 18th century. This is Richard Wilson, a Royal Society of Art artist of the English and Welsh tradition, but he's very much inspired by Claude in the 18th century. And this one is quite striking. This is also Claude Lorraine, his hilly countryside, dating to 1640. It's a pen and ink wash with brown wash, and evoking that idyllic pastoral mood. And we see also in French 18th century sepia drawings, things that the Coolidges may have seen in France, with this Boucher and his contemporaries, with classical and mythological scenes often depicted in the sepia tones. And then bringing us closer to the late 19th and 20th centuries, sepia photographs. Sepia really became the color of nostalgia. On the left is a souvenir you might have taken back of Paris. The Eiffel Tower evokes nostalgia and romance. On the right is a portrait of young Cornelius Crane, circa 1911, young with his sailboat, just this lovely, nostalgic, warm, and sort of sentimental image. And I was quite struck by finding this Claude Lorraine 17th century landscape and comparing it to our Stevens-Coolidge Place mural, because there's this pastoral landscape. It's the natural versus the designed landscape that we saw in the lush gardens on the first floor. But they very much reminded me of that European sense of the picturesque. Yet here at Stevens-Coolidge Place, we have the American picturesque. It's a picturesque pastoral landscape that is clearly not European, but instead very American. And very unlike the lush polychrome mural that we saw downstairs, here Ramirez and Chandler evoke a still, a quiet slice of Americana. This natural world, this natural landscape, very peaceful, very untamed world versus the very designed landscape you might see outside in their gardens, which are the perennial gardens, the French garden, much more designed. But this is a much more natural Americana landscape. This is also reminiscent of what we found in America, the Hudson River School. This is Thomas Cole's famous oxbow of 1836. And like Cole, the Stevens-Coolidge Place mural, also on the right, shows light sort of traveling the water, light on the water, sort of leading the eye through the painting. The plant in the foreground, the clouds above the mountains. Very, very similar and dramatic, but also very peaceful landscape. And I didn't want to forget adding Rufus Porter. Many of you may know of him, the famous American folk artist, traveling folk artist and inventor. This is a beautiful monochromatic mural in that Angrisai colorway, the browns, the grays, that's found at our Harvard, Mass. Fruitlands Museum. When you go see Christie's exhibition, you can check out this beautiful Rufus Porter mural. And this is quite similar in many ways to what we see at Stevens-Coolidge, yet without the sailboats. This is much more naive, more folky, and I think the Stevens-Coolidge is much more of the English, European tradition, but very similar, capturing America at its more, the infancy of Americana, the naive, the folk painting a little bit earlier. Whereas I think what we're finding here in the scenes of Americana is more that European tradition, the later, the more picturesque. And again, little scenes of whimsy we have here. A little goat captured above the fireplace, and then a steamboat, sort of a nod to the post-colonial technology, maybe the America to come. And the steamboat was something that revolutionized water transportation and trade. So you don't see the sailboats that you saw in Rufus Porter, but you see the steamboat here. Also a sense of the human presence in the landscape, the colonial house, which is that little touch of color in the landscape, and also the Native American in the canoe. Just very picturesque, idyllic landscape, and that sense of light. So part of the restoration project is documenting that history. Our archival photographs of the ballroom, circa 1915. It mentions from the Archive Center. And you get a sense of, you can see it, you don't really see the color, of course, in this, but you get a sense of that colonial image they were after. A friend of mine calls oldsy-timesy New England, with all the decorative arts on the mantelpiece. And that's how they had the room set up. Oops. There we go. The archival plans that we have in our archives show the hall, we called it the hall, and the added servants' room hall behind it. There's a notation at the base that said, present hooks and ceiling to be used for hanging chandeliers. And so there are these hooks hanging and people always ask about. So that's what we found through the archives. And again, the servants' room was restored this summer as well as part of this larger project. So looking at the project itself, as Christie mentioned, the mural was painted using distemper paint on plaster. The distemper paint has been flaking, suffering from water damage. The color is alive, but yet with much surface dirt, and it was in desperate need of conservation. This is that same wall that we saw in the archival photo, the fireplace wall, but where we see quite a bit of losses along the fireplace mantelpiece on the wall to the left. And this shows what actually distemper paint is. I learned this actually recently. I happened to go to RISD for a wallpaper. They have a wonderful exhibition, or had, on French wallpaper design. But here they use distemper paint for making wallpaper. And this is one of the RISD professors, a friend of mine, Andrew Raftery, creating with his students making hand-painted wallpaper, which is that smaller print up in the front. But they're really like gelatin, little pellets of gelatin that you add pigment is infused and you create that color with it. So it's a very binding to the plaster material. It gives a matte surface, but that's what makes it also hard to clean. And some of the challenges, again, the water damage, the paint losses, the steam from the radiator you can see on the right. So things that definitely needed attention sooner rather than later before we lost these treasures. And one of our top priorities was really saving that signature. Like he did near the clock in the stair hall landing, we have that buckled wall, which was suffered from water damage over the years, has been stabilized, and Joseph Ramidis Anno Dom 1918. So very critical to save that. There's quite a bit of soot on the surface. The fireplace, you imagine, have been used over the years, and a lot of dirt just sticking to that. It's not a wipeable surface, so it does have a lot of that soot. So that is actually my hand holding the sponge that was used to help clean that, and you can get a sense of the before and after on the slide on the right. Has been surface cleaned, and this is just initially. And here again is Lisa Malin consolidating the paint. To consolidate that flaking paint, she applies a 7% solution of rabbit skin glue, applied warm through the Japanese tissue, and then she'll use on Mylar a tacking iron to sort of make sure it's stable, and then she can peel it off. It's just remarkable. All these like postage stamp size pieces of Japanese paper, but so it takes a great deal of patience and a great deal of time, but it's just marvelous results. And here she is in painting with watercolor paints, Winsor & Newton watercolors, and the rocks in the foreground you see on the right. That's a little bit of the before. She just started this project in April, but so we're about a few weeks in, but really has made great strides and feels very positive about the results. And there she is doing more in painting with her wonderful palette of. And really for this, of course, she's not using all the colors like she did downstairs, but just getting the right tones of sepia and browns and pinky beiges. It takes quite a lot of work and trial and error, but she's getting those colors just right. And it's again where science meets art. It's a tremendous amount of science to get this, to do this type of conservation, but also it takes the artist's eye to get it just right. So the project itself, just to give some statistics, is 20 wall panels, approximately 650 square feet, and an estimated 673 hours of work. So a daunting job, a daunting task, but I do think it will be worth it. It truly is a treasure. And part of our key story is how the Spanish immigrant painter Joseph Ramidis captured New England during the colonial revival era, bringing European art sensibilities to American homes. And that's our American Picturesque, helping to celebrate America's 250th. It's just great timing, I think, because that whole room feels like a little nod to Americana and the colonial revival mural and the colonial revival movement. Excuse me. It's been a long day. But I do think it'll be a wonderful way to celebrate the 250th and have more programs there, more public access. We're thrilled to be able to open that up starting next weekend. So whether you're inspired by the European gardens or American landscapes, I think the Stevens-Coolidge scenic murals are, in the words of Mrs. Coolidge, exotic and exuberant and truly American treasures. So please come visit, and we thank you, and we thank North Andover and the opportunity to have funding help us with this through CPA grant. It's very generous, and we look forward to sharing these projects and the Coolidge's home with you this season. Thank you. We are happy to take questions, and if you have any.
Absolutely. I'll come around with the microphone.
Oh,
The house lights,
this
please.
really is like a movie theater. We need the popcorn.
Hello. So this is our mic. When you ask a question, if you wouldn't mind holding it directly to your face and speaking into it for the benefit of the people watching in the future via recording and not necessarily for the people in the room. Does anybody have a question?
You said that it's going to be completely done by July 4th? Or that's the
Oh,
plan?
no.
Okay.
Not at all.
No.
No.
I didn't quite understand the timeline.
That would be nice. By next, no, by the 250th being next year, we're proud to show it. But this year, we just started it, and it will take hundreds of hours of work. So we plan to be done per our funding stipulations by the end of December. Lisa thinks it'll happen before that because it's going fairly smoothly, but it will take the better part of 6 months to get that done at 2 days a week because she is juggling a lot of other jobs. However, we are happy to open up the room to show visitors this year. For the first time in many years, we're having the second floor open for our regular house tours, not the sort of walk through, but when we have a proper tour, you'll get to see Mrs. Coolidge's room, the guest room that leads into the ballroom. And so it's kind of fun, I think, to see the work in progress, so that before and after, where it's seeing the damage, but then the gratification of seeing it afterwards and seeing walls that are sort of half done, it sort of shows you the progress. Lisa Malin would also like to, we're going to try to book her when we can on weekends and just have her there for a program or two. And for our Trails and Sails, which comes up with Essex Heritage in September, she'd like to be there. She's been wonderful and very amenable to showing conservation in action.
And you stated how many square feet of, how much bigger was the one on the first and second floor within the stairwells to this one?
You know, part of it they're a little different. Less the square footage is important, but more what's going on with the walls. So the downstairs had some kind of more like areas of big loss. The house had rattled at various points with traffic and things like that. The doors had been open and closed, so you were getting a lot from humidity changes that were happening, and also just the wide range of colors that it took. So it was much more in depth, and we were doing it during COVID. So that also restricted, she would have to be alone, and we'd be like, how's it going over there in the next room? But I think, you know, one of the other things, just to point out that, you know, Susan and I have been really loving, and this happens when you do projects like this, it is so nice to look so closely at something and really take some time to look at it. And so we love checking in with Lisa. She's very collaborative. And so we'll look a little bit closer at something that we've walked by 100 times. And she'll tell us little things that she's noticing as she's going through. And then honestly, I think we were walking through the upstairs and just noticing all these little fun details that want to make you go deeper into it. So it is sort of a gratifying process as a curator because we're running around all the time to look so closely and for so long at something. It gives us a chance to explore it.
It is. And it's something children love to see too. Like, can you find the butterfly in that? No, it's just people love to see all these little details. Or can you find the goat? And can you know, so then we've noticed that with other, like the Long Hill has a beautiful mural as well. Even our Chinese wallpapers that might have little bugs and birds. So it's fun to see those details as you start seeing deeply and really looking at the restoration, because you might be missing half of an element and it gets in-painted and sort of brings a whole new life to it. And just the vibrancy of it coming back to life is so gratifying. I think a lot of time nurses and we call the conservators the nurses of the decorative arts, because they really do bring things back to life and care for them. And we all put our loving care into these homes, whether you're curators, property directors, engagement people. We just all love to share them with our visitors. So I think it's exciting to be able to do that as it gets better and better too. So you have to keep coming back.
And the organic nature of the materials, when we're talking about the hide glue, that's organic. Over time, things change. And so even in the best conditions, any mural that's made with distemper would need to have conservation. And you could see in the slide you had of the radiator and some of the loss, part of that was an outline of what we think may have been an old window. So the house is breathing and doing its thing. So you start to see these clues to the architecture before.
Yeah, and we've had a lot of structural work done on the exterior as well that will help prevent that water penetration that was happening and was actively coming leaking. Now the roof's been redone, a lot of the copper flashing, so much has been done on the house thanks to this grant in the last few years that really helped us stabilize everything. And in order to get the inside stable and being able to move forward with these projects, it made sense to do the outside first, just like it made sense to tackle the ceiling, which was one of those calcimined ceiling, always just dripping on all over everything. So that got done this year, and now we've got the mural. So it takes patience and funds, one step at a time, but when it finally adds up together, it's very gratifying.
So you showed a photo of the morning room with layers of paper and paint, I believe,
Yes.
and then you found the peony wallpaper.
Yeah.
Were the murals, was anything done to the murals at all before this restoration?
So this is a great question. So there was an earlier campaign with the murals downstairs that Susan helped to oversee, and I think it was a lot.
Before my time, even. I think it was early '90s.
Yeah.
Christie Cunningham Adams
But
was
so-
a
yeah.
mentor to Lisa, actually.
And
did some
sometimes,
stabilizing.
like benign neglect in a good way. Like when we talk about what we do, we try to take the most conservative approach for anything, right? Like you don't want to aggressively keep polishing silver because eventually that's going to hurt the material itself. So in a similar way, the murals had just not been touched for much of their life, and furniture had been in front of it, so I think over the years as visitors were there, they weren't really rubbing up against it quite so much. So I think that kind of quietness in the house helped us for sure, so that we didn't have to do too much. But yes, they really did. It was all the heating systems over the years that really caused.
Yeah.
It was so dramatic
It was
to take
cost
this.
prohibitive too. It's
Yeah.
a really big job, and it was, as you said, a combination of. I remember when the lines were going under the road many years ago, and that really shook the road, and you'd have little flakes of paint come, on the wainscot. Every time you came in. So those kinds of things were really starting to build up, and we noticed more cracks, stress cracks in the walls. So then we knew it had to be dealt with. And then once you dealt with those structural things, we're dealing with the cosmetic work. So phases. We're getting to the good part when it's all the good visuals, really.
And keeping the doors closed, moving ahead, that's not how visitors, they're kind of coming through the dining room now. And that will also help because part of our process as curators is before even conservation, you'll bring in experts to help us just assess what's going on, what's the course of action, what are the things we should or should not do. And it was very clear by several people coming in, do not open these doors because the temperature swings were really bad. So
Yeah.
I think that will also
It's
help
not a
us
climate-controlled space,
Right.
which also is tricky.
So what's your guesstimate on the longevity of this restoration?
Ooh, we have to ask Lisa that.
Yeah.
Hopefully another 100 years.
Yeah. I mean,
Because
I
it's reached
think-
its 100-year mark, really. I mean, it was
Right.
1918, so we're past beyond that. So hopefully with the technology today, and I mean, it should last a good long time. If we could get a little bit more, with the extremes of climate, that's always tricky, but we have more UV storm windows now. We're trying to protect, keep things cooler, keep the light off of it. We know a little bit more about preservation than having it wide open for so many years. Hopefully another 100 years, I'd love to say, but
And I
that's
think-
probably
And also the
optimistic.
people
I don't
like
know.
walking through it. I mean, we don't want to open those doors to the outside right there, but airflow, I mean, houses are meant to have people in them. And so I'm so happy that the site is open and you can come see it, but the movement of people and air is also very good for houses just naturally. So I think we're setting it up for a good longevity for
I
the
hope
next.
so.
Do you still plan on having a before and after segment of the upstairs mural so people can see the
Yes,
difference?
Lisa did say she started on that already, but she wanted to do the most critical bits first because of the things that are flaking, to just address that. But she was going to leave, for comparison's sake, leave a before and after. And we could leave a small section if we want to permanently, for a permanent visual record of what it was. But I don't, at least for the time being, to see that conservation in action, that just makes such a difference. And it really already has made a big difference with just taking that soot off the surface was tremendous. We thought it was darker than it was, and it turns out that it's this lovely terracotta that has a lot more brightness and warmth, but still muted. You know, get that pastoral, and it really speaks to that whole era, I think.
And they also will get reports from our conservators for objects and something like this too. So even her proposal was 30 pages long just for the proposal. So it helps us to document. So if someone else comes up to it and wants to know what happened on that panel through photos and a conservation report, we'll be able to kind of track it.
And we will be submitting with as per the CPA grant reports every 3 months. So that's part of the process. So sort of. And you'll see that difference as we go along. But
can you tell we have fun working together? It's so wonderful to see.
anything else?
Hi there.
Hi, Lynn.
Hey, I know this wasn't part of the presentation, but when you showed the picture of the morning room, it made me, the work on the fabrics. Can you talk a little bit about the fabric work that you did as well?
Yep.
Sure. I have like a whole
Well, there was
lecture
the
on
Dynamix
that.
one.
Yeah.
You'll have
You
to
wanna
come.
hear
You'll
more.
have to come back.
You have to
Well,
come back.
I will say, just like sort of briefly, one of the challenges that Susan is fantastic with fabrics, and we sometimes go to the Boston Design Center, and we have fun just looking through things and then going to Simmons and other places. One of the challenges with the fabrics in that house that had really reached the end of their life, and that included not only the fabrics there, but we had about 30 lampshades redone, is that the types of designs on those fabrics are not easily found. So the fabric, if you really got into it and looked at that fabric that I had reproduced, it had this really kind of sexy, almost like a stripe through it that was very sort of aesthetic movement. It was a little geometric amid all of the flowers, and you just don't find that. You can maybe find some big florals. And so I made the decision early on to reach out to Dynamix, which is a New York-based company. They work with places like the Met and a bunch of other historic houses. Susan had known of them.
Yes, because I was working with the researcher on Frances Elkins, who found this fabric in her archives and said, "Do you recognize this?" And I, "Oh yes, that was from Cornelius Crane's room." And we thought, well, let's try to reproduce it. And the two options were to have it hand block created and have it printed, or found, and we ended up doing that through Ann Kirk Textiles in New York. Or you could have Dynamix, who does work for the Met, where if you have a large enough repeat and a large enough piece of fabric, because we did not for the Cornelius Crane, we had the full panels in the morning room, you could send that to them and they can digitally reproduce it. So they basically digitally reproduce that on linen, and it looks like it was,
It was during
the
COVID,
block
and
printed.
the linen was coming from Europe, and it was like held up, and finally it came, and then we had looked in and just carefully, we have all the original curtains and the original fabrics, and so you could kind of peel apart and just look into the spaces that never get light, and you could see how bright. And so it had faded so much that it looked like it was gray on gray with a little bit of florals. So when they sent that sample, I was like, holy smokes. And then when we had it laid, we work with a wonderful group who does all the upholstery work and sort of slip covers. And they laid it out exactly like they had. So the stripe down the back of these little side chairs when you go into the morning room, again, it has this really sexy stripe down that you couldn't even see before. And so I think it really brings back, so before what felt like beige on beige on beige is suddenly like roses, roses, roses. And I've used them for other projects. And Susan, just some of the fabrics that I had done for the upstairs Helen's bedroom, Susan just had that fabric now put into slip covers and curtains too. So you'll see that shortly.
And the person that does them, Laura, is fantastic. Not only is the fabric recreated, but she recreates the style, the box pleats, just so they look like little skirts and little dresses on the slipper chairs or on the day bed. So they do a tremendous job of recreating the style of that era as well as working with that fabric. So it really does evoke, you feel like you've stepped into the past when you go into Stevens-Coolidge, but at least now, the fabrics are fresh and alive, and together with the paint and the murals and the new fabrics, I think it's really come back to life in a beautiful way.
Yeah, and you're like, now I see where they were going.
Yeah, and
with
we're still
this.
working. It's a work in progress.
Yes,
Upstairs,
yeah.
we're going to keep going. It's, but it takes a while, but we'll get there.
I
But
keep
thank you,
going,
Lynn.
but
Thank
that's
you, Lynn. No, it's-
so fun. It's so fun, this process.
So, of all the conservation that was at Stevens-Coolidge, what was the mural the biggest challenge, or was there something else that you found to be more of a challenge? And was there anything also that surprised you?
bug damage.
I have one. Do you want to? And you
No,
can,
I was saying, yeah, the murals are the biggest, right, in terms of the comprehensive project itself and the complicatedness of it. But you were working with, during COVID, moth outbreaks, and those
Yeah.
kinds of pest infestations were bad, and that was a big challenge.
during COVID.
So we had to, discard some of the rugs, and there was those kinds of things are the not so pretty part of it all, but just something we have to deal with and really monitor for that kind of thing is a big challenge. But I would say the
think
mural.
one of this is going to sound strange, but in that room when you saw the morning room, the pink, and we found it. Oh my gosh, I can't believe this was here. Honestly, I had this philosophical moment when I'm like, really? It's just solid wallpaper. There's no pattern. And I called, and I'll give him the credit, Richard Nylander, who is preeminent in our decorative arts field, and a friend and colleague. And I called him, and I said, how can it be that it's just one color? There's no pattern. Should I trust this? Is this going to be right? Like, I know this is what the evidence is showing me. And I remember he said, think of it this way. It's the backdrop for everything else.
That's right.
And I think sometimes in these moments for curators, you do have to take a leap of faith that the choices you're making in the original intent, Chandler's original intent, and Helen and John, that trust it. It will get you there. And for me, that was maybe not a hard moment or a big project, but it was sort of this, oh boy, moment. And sure enough, when it went on, it just has this simple sheen, because it's, even though it's just plain colored wallpaper in one color, it has a texture to it. And then when you add on the other fabrics in the room and the hangings on the wall and the artwork, then you can see it really comes. So that was sort of an interesting,
Yeah, you have to let the
unexpected
history
moment.
detective work. You have
Yeah.
to trust history. You have to trust and go with what you find, and not try to impose today's sensibilities of matching, or today's sensibilities of color and maybe painting the details of a woodwork a different color. You just have to trust it, and then it's usually right. That happened at Castle Hill over and again. That when we changed the room from linen white to what was underneath, it always worked, but you just got to trust. You have to have faith, because it's very easy to think, oh, what was that? But it usually is right, and it's right for that moment, and it's right for speaking to that time and the era of the house. So,
And we have fun talking. We'll call each other up like, okay,
you
I
think
just
this is right?
right.
Yeah.
Do I think this is
Or
right?
we'll pull, with Bob Murray and I pulled a mirror off the wall, and like, oh, there's the wallpaper behind it. So I had
Right.
that reproduced in Ireland to match the original little tiny dot pattern. But
Yeah.
it works once you get it all together, put all the pieces together.
Any further questions?
I actually hi everybody. I'm Pilar. I am the property director over at Stevens-Coolidge, and I just want to say thank you so much to Susan and Christie. I've learned a lot from the both of you. I did want to just say, coming up, as Susan alluded to, the house will be open for tours starting May 31st, which is a Saturday after Memorial Day weekend. We would love to see you. As you all may know, we don't have admissions to the property, so you can come at any time. We'd love to see you into the house from 12 to 4 on Saturdays and Sundays. It is free for a first floor walkthrough, but we will have guided tours at 11 o'clock on Saturdays and Sundays with some of our wonderful guides in the audience. And they will give you all kinds of wonderful information. And we will do, and that's when you can see the second floor and some of those rooms leading into the ballroom. I'll also mention, as Susan said, we are working on doing some Trails and Sails, which is an event organized by Essex Heritage. So it's 16 days of free events all over Essex County. And we will have some moments with Lisa Mellon, who is the conservator, to talk about conservation in action and give some tours. Those will be free. And we're going to come up with some other opportunities specifically for North Andover residents. So stay tuned, look at our website, and come see us. And I will mention in 1 week from today, supposedly from our amazing horticulturist, Keila Robinson, the peonies are about to pop, as are irises. So come see us soon.
Yeah. Everyone's woo, peony.
And then the wallpaper. You can see the wallpaper.
Well, thank you again once everyone
Thank
for coming,
you.
and a round of applause for our speakers, Christie and Susan.
Thank you for having us.